Fox News alert at this hour, the Senate gaveling into session as Republican lawmakers are meeting with President Trump at the White House as we speak. The Senate is expected to take up a short-term spending bill that the House passed yesterday, with the clock ticking to reach a deal to avoid a partial government shutdown at midnight. This is Outnumbered, and I'm Melissa Francis, here today, host of the Evening Edit on the Fox Business Network, Elizabeth McDonald, EMAC as we call her, national security analyst Morgan Ortegas, Fox News contributor Jessica Tarlov, and joining us on the couch, editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller News Foundation, Christopher Bedford. Thank you for joining us. You got some festive pants going on there.
I'm ready for the season.
They seem to have reindeer antler critters.
Even if it's not snowing, exactly.
All over them, and you have the red and green tie. You're really bringing the whole entire thing today, and we appreciate it. Love it. Let's get to it. Some Republican senators visiting the White House today ahead of the high-stakes battle. President Trump urging Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to use the so-called nuclear option to pass the spending bill, which includes more than $5 billion in funding for the border wall. The White House stepping up pressure on lawmakers to deliver on the president's signature campaign promise. Here's White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders.
The House Republicans delivered a huge victory last night for border security, and we're very hopeful that the Senate will come through and help protect the American people. And we need a wall and we need border security in order to have that. We have to protect the people of this country, and the president is going to stand firm and make sure that that happens one way or another.
Democrats are vowing not to support any bill which funds the wall. Listen.
I think this is a fight more over message and the president trying to fulfill a campaign promise rather than substance. And in a series of hearings and meetings with Homeland Security and Customs and Border Patrol leaders, I've been convinced that building a big concrete border wall isn't a wise investment, but we should invest more in border security.
Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill with more. Mike.
Melissa, good afternoon. 12 hours out from that funding deadline, and the blame game is already underway. President Trump tweeted earlier, the Democrats now own the shutdown. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer fired back, you own the shutdown, your own words, real Donald Trump. The Senate unanimously passed a bipartisan solution to avoid a shutdown. Then you threw another temper tantrum and convinced the House to ignore that compromise. Hashtag Trump shutdown.
The bottom line is simple. The Trump temper tantrum will shut down the government, but it will not get him his wall. The bill that's on the floor of the House, everyone knows will not pass the Senate. Speaker Ryan, Leader McCarthy have cynically put it on the floor of the House, knowing it can't pass the Senate. Everyone knows it can't pass the Senate.
One reason Schumer is so confident is 60 votes are needed to pass it in the Senate. And Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has resisted calls by the president to change Senate rules to a 51-vote threshold. McConnell's spokesman notes there isn't enough support for the so-called nuclear option. For example, Tennessee Republican Senator Lamar Alexander saying today, quote, we have rules to follow. I want to put a stop to this practice of the Senate breaking its rules to change its rules. I will not vote to turn the Senate into a rule-breaking institution, and I hope that my colleagues will not. A leading House Republican says now the ball is in the Senate's court.
Let's see if they can start negotiating in good faith. I think a lot of those folks in the Senate didn't want to negotiate because they didn't think the House would pass this bill. But now we've done that. They are going to have to confront this issue that the rest of the country's already been recognizing Washington needs to confront.
I'm told a big part of the Republican message to President Trump in the Oval Office today is when Republicans are successful, such as with tax reform and Justice Kavanaugh, their focus is on battling the Democrats and not bickering over arcane Senate rules. Melissa?
All right. That's a lot there. We're going to break it all down. Mike Emanuel, thank you so much. Chris, let me bring it on out to the couch. You know, for the early part of the week, folks were saying, wow, it looks like Trump is just rolling over. He's just caving. Who's surprised that he didn't cave in the end and that he stood up and said, why don't you guys get out there and actually work for a living, go back down to the floor, and try and get something done?
On Tuesday night, it looked like he was going to roll over. By Wednesday, it was up in the air again. And on Tuesday, the White House is already making excuses for it. And then by Thursday morning, groups of conservatives were much more optimistic that he was going to say no. And I think it's good for him politically to have said no. This could have been a read my lips moment, like the famous one with President H.W. Bush said, read my lips, no new taxes, and then changed his mind on taxes to reach a compromise. The White House saying no here doesn't mean that he's going to get $5 billion in wall funding tomorrow, but it does mean that they have to negotiate, and he probably will end up getting more unless they want to shut down the government for 3 days over the Christmas break.
Jessica, Nancy Pelosi said again and again that he didn't have the votes in the House. And we always talk about how she's the best vote counter out there in the business. What happened? I mean, was her counting ticker off? What the heck happened? How did she screw up that one?
She wasn't in charge of the Republican caucus, which is really what shifted.
No, but she said he didn't have the votes, and he did have the votes.
She definitely did that, and I thought, and many thought, and we'll see what happens, continue to think that Chuck and Nancy were the ultimate victors out of that, because he did say, I will happily own the shutdown. But she was definitely off about the votes there. And it's good to see that senators have a decent memory of at least a few years to know that if you do switch to the nuclear option, that can come back to hurt you. And maybe just in a few years, we don't know what's going to happen in 2020. I think the president will probably get something out of this. I think we want to avert a shutdown. But Chuck Schumer had come to him with a $1.6 billion deal for border security. Not his wall, not his concrete slats, but something...
Steel slats. Sorry, steel slats. It has to be alliteration. If it's Trump, it has to be alliteration. So it would be
My apologies to the wordsmith, President Trump. Steel slats, but to give him something, and he scoffed at the $1.6 billion. I don't know if he's going to get that much out of it.
Chuck Schumer looking a lot like Scrooge there, with his glasses at the end of his nose, saying, no, you will not get your wall for Christmas.
And then we have Senator Marco Rubio tweeting out, the Democrats are opposing $5 billion when they signed off on $800 billion in Obama's stimulus that went to things like Solyndra. I'm looking back at this, I'm thinking, why is this such an irritating grandstanding display? And there were 20 government shutdowns since the mid-'70s. So what happened in the mid-'70s? Nixon tried to seize control of the budget. Congress said, no, it's under our purview. And since then, we've had a shutdown every other year. Practically every other year. So this is really serious political grandstanding when we're talking about just about a third of the budget. And I think the American people are done with it. It's an irritating thing to deal with.
And the government always shuts down for Christmas.
Right. Yeah, I mean, they're not going to keep working. Morgan, so there's this talk back and forth, and Jessica brought it up about the nuclear option. And there is, to me, what seems to be a false premise where they're saying don't invoke the nuclear option because then when the Democrats get in, they'll invoke it. So what's the guarantee if they don't invoke it, so then the Democrats promise when they're in charge they're not going to invoke it? I don't buy that for a second.
Well, let me tell you why I do buy it. It's because I think that, and Jess can probably attest to this, is that the Democrats, every time the president gets record amount of judges through, gets Supreme Court justices through, I think that they're all sort of shooting daggers mentally at Harry Reid for changing that. And I think that there is a ton of regret. I mean, listen, one of the signature accomplishments of this administration will be that they have remade the courts through their appointments specifically because of Harry Reid changing the rules.
And you don't think that Democrats will follow that lead, and you don't think that Democrats will follow what Harry Reid did? I mean, you don't think that they'll invoke the nuclear option when they see how well it worked with the judges, as you said?
Well, here's a better deal than quibbling over the nuclear option, in my opinion. We have the deal maker in chief, right? So why don't we have the guy who is getting Kim Jong-un and all of these people to the table? Well, let me finish, Jess, whether you agree with it or not. Like, we have the ultimate deal maker, so why doesn't he? I mean, he can step forward and say, I'm willing to put a number of things on the table. Maybe it's DACA, maybe it's something else, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be immigration related. He could hold up a big shiny apple of something that they want that doesn't have anything to do with immigration. There's a number of options for the president to make a deal here. That's what I think we should be focusing on. Let him do his magic.
Emac, what about that? Because it is a golden opportunity for Democrats. He obviously desperately wants this money. He wants his campaign promise. And they're saying no, when in fact they could get something really great and really painful for themselves. I, for one, would not be able to resist that opportunity.
And have a legislative victory going into 2020 instead of the T-shirt air cannon of subpoenas they're aiming at President Trump. So that's the question. And, when I'm watching the Democrats take to the cameras, I'm waiting for somebody to say to them, hey, what about the border crisis? What about the crime pouring over the border? What about the illegal immigrants pouring over the border? Why not get control of the border when you yourself voted for hundreds of miles of fence since 2006? I see the Democrats not responding to that, not addressing the issues with what our border patrol guys are saying is a serious problem.
But Tim Ryan gave a speech on the floor yesterday at the House where he addressed it head on.
I just want to tell you guys, we're looking on the screen right here, and we see Mitch McConnell leaving the White House. He's in the car. They're pulling away. They were just inside. Chris, how do you think that conversation went?
Well, Mitch McConnell's actually, I think, more in line with President Trump. He would be okay with funding the wall if he feels like he could get it through. But the Senate, to the nuclear option, the Senate's been degrading as an institution for years and years and years in the U.S. It used to be a place where the states were represented and where tempers were able to cool down. We got rid of that in an amendment, and now where Terry Reid broke the rules, and I'm cynical about it. I don't think that the Democratic majority coming in eventually won't break those rules.
Right.
To your point. But they should hold back because the Senate shouldn't be a majority-run, mob-run institution, and we're getting closer to that every single year.
But can I make one point about what Liz said, which I think is really crucial here? For me, this argument is not about the wall, right? The wall is a metaphor for how do these two parties feel about border security in general. And we've seen the party, the Clinton party, even the Obama party, the Democrat party, change dramatically their position on immigration. The energy of the party is to say that ICE should be abolished. Major candidates running for president in 2020 say radical things on immigration as it relates to law enforcement, as it relates to ICE. If you look at the top 20 people running for the Democrat Party, tell me one of them who will not say that ICE doesn't need to be abolished. It's a radical agenda.
Jessica, there are people. Sherrod Brown wouldn't say that. Amy Klobuchar wouldn't say that. Mitch Landrieu wouldn't say that. Eric Garcetti wouldn't say that.
But are they the loudest voices? They're not the loudest voices.
No, but they are the people who could be the
nominees.
nominees. I understand Kirsten Gillibrand talked about it, and Kamala Harris. She played with it, but that is not what the party stands for. That is what fringe people on the left stand for. It's not our policy.
Kirsten Gillibrand is the New York senator. She's not fringe.
No,
she was
it is a fringe position across the country. We elected moderate Democrats.
One at a time. Hold on. Let Jessica respond. Go ahead. And then you.
What happened in the midterms was a wave of electing moderate Democrats across this country. We saw progressives shut out of a lot of elections that people thought were winnable either in primaries or when it came to election day. We're going to talk later about Claire McCaskill and Heidi Heitkamp and what they're saying about how we have to pay attention to the moderates. This country is full of moderates. And just because some progressives are screaming at you loudly doesn't mean that we are the party that wants to abolish ICE. That is not what we stand for. And there are other ways to secure our border than putting up a wall that he used, frankly, as a racist dog whistle on the campaign trail, and that's what people object to.
Racist dog whistle? Morgan, real quick.
I have an expensive shoe collection, and if the Democrat nominee in 2020 does not take a radical position on immigration, I will eat this Ferragamo.
All right. Well, let's leave it there with the eating of our shoes. We know that right now the press is inside what is a signing ceremony inside the White House, and I would be willing to bet good money that the president will not be able to resist making some sort of comment about what is going on right now with this fight over the border wall and funding. And as soon as we get that video, that tape playback, we are going to bring it to you the second we have it. Meanwhile, growing divisions among Democrats ahead of the new Congress. Democratic Senator Claire McCaskill, who lost her re-election bid, is taking aim at the party's move to the left and the rise of Democratic Socialist Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We were just talking about that. We've got a lot more on it coming up. Plus, new reaction to Defense Secretary James Mattis's resignation as officials say the White House is shifting its strategy in Afghanistan. A live report from Jennifer Griffin with all the details ahead.
If Secretary Mattis doesn't feel like he's the right person to fill that job, I think it was the right thing and an honorable thing that he did in stepping aside.
And to top it all off, President Trump has thrown a temper tantrum and now has us careening towards a Trump shutdown over Christmas. In a short time, the Senate will take part in a pointless exercise to demonstrate to our House colleagues and the President what everyone here already knows. There are not the votes in the Senate for an expensive, taxpayer-funded border wall. So, President Trump, You will not get your wall. Abandon your shutdown strategy. You're not getting the wall today, next week, or on January 3rd when Democrats take control of the House. Just 2 days ago, the Senate came together to support a proposal by Leader McConnell, unanimously, every Democrat, every Republican, to extend government funding through February without partisan demands. What it would accomplish would be that the government would not shut down. The fights that we're having would be postponed to a later day, and millions of Americans would not be hurt this Christmas week. So let me repeat that. The Senate, every Democrat, every Republican has already unanimously supported a clean extension of government funding. Democrats supported the measure because we do not want to see the government shut down. We have no demands other than that. We had every indication the president would sign the legislation, as did our friends, the Republicans on the other side of the aisle in the Senate. But yesterday, President Trump, hounded by the radical voices of the hard right, threw another temper tantrum. And here we are, once again, on the brink of what the president has spent months saying he wanted, a Trump shutdown. The president will try to do his best to blame Democrats, but it's flatly absurd. President Trump called for a shutdown no less than 25 times. In our meeting in the Oval Office, President Trump said, quote, "If we don't get what we want, I, President Trump, will shut down the government." "I am proud to shut it down," said President Trump. "I'm not going to blame you," meaning Democrats. "I will take the mantle of shutting it down." Those are President Trump's words, and nothing he says or does today can undo that. No Democrat has called for shutting the government down. We are all working to avoid it. The president seems to relish it. He seems to feel it'll throw a bone to his base. The problem being, his base is less than 1/4 of America. Mr. President, President Trump, you cannot erase months of video of you saying that you wanted a shutdown and that you wanted the responsibility and blame for a shutdown. President Trump, you own the shutdown. You said so in your own words. And President Trump may get his wish, unfortunately. But it doesn't have to be this way. Democrats have offered 2 alternatives, and Republicans, Leader McConnell, has offered 1. Democrats have offered to pass the 6 bipartisan appropriation bills, plus a 1-year continuing resolution for Homeland Security. We have also offered a 1-year continuing resolution for all the remaining bills. Republicans have offered to pass a short-term continuing resolution through early February. Each one of those proposals would pass the House, pass the Senate. Each one of those proposals contains $1.3 billion of real border security, not a wall. There is no wall in those proposals. Democrats support real border security, not a wall. And by the way, that is in addition to the $1.3 billion in border security Congress allocated last year, the vast majority of which the Trump administration has not yet spent. They're asking for loads of more money. They haven't even spent last year's money. It's clearly a political gambit by President Trump to appease his never-happy base. On the other hand, a Trump shutdown would result in $0 for the Department of Homeland Security over the Christmas holiday. So, there are several ways for President Trump and congressional Republicans to avoid a shutdown over Christmas. I've mentioned 3. But there is only one way we will have a Trump shutdown: if President Trump clings to his position for an unnecessary, ineffective, taxpayer-funded border wall that he promised Mexico could pay for. I yield the floor. the absence of a quorum.
That was Senator Chuck Schumer on the floor of the Senate addressing the chamber, putting the blame for what could be a shutdown coming down the pike squarely at the feet of the president. We are also expecting to hear from the president very soon. He had a signing ceremony. There were reporters inside. We think he will probably say something about what is going on today. And as soon as we get that, we will bring it to you. In the meantime, Jessica.
Great. As we wait to hear from the president, new reaction to Defense Secretary James Mattis leaving the White House at the end of February. Mattis, in his letter of resignation, says the president deserves a defense secretary whose views are, quote, better aligned with his views. His resignation comes as President Trump orders the Pentagon to prepare to pull U.S. troops out of Syria. A U.S. defense official is reportedly telling Fox News Mattis resigned in protest over the president's national security policies. Here is White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders this morning on Mattis's legacy. Take a watch.
And he served the president and this country. He served in this administration for 2 years, and he served the country and the military for over 4 decades. An incredible person, an incredible servant to this country, and somebody that we have the highest amount of respect for and wish him very well and look forward to continuing to work with him over the next 2 months. Let's not forget, he's not just walking out the door. This will be an orderly process, and it will continue to be a good relationship over these next couple of months.
Yesterday, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle expressed their concerns over Secretary Mattis's resignation and over reports that the president is ordering a major military withdrawal from Afghanistan. Officials also telling Fox News President Trump has ordered a start of a drawdown of U.S. troops there, with several thousand troops to return home in the coming weeks. Currently, there are 14,000 U.S. troops in Afghanistan. Jennifer Griffin with more, live in Washington.
Jessica, make no mistake, Jim Mattis is not resigning because he's tired. Marines don't get tired. He's resigning in protest over the president's national security policies, according to officials I've spoken to. This was a resignation based on principle, according to those familiar with the secretary's decision. I'm told the final straw for Mattis was the president's order to withdraw from Syria. The last 18 hours sealed his decision. It appears his resignation letter had already been written, I'm told. Mattis went over to the White House at about 3 p.m. yesterday with his resignation letter in hand. He spent about 45 minutes with the president. He did not try to change the president's mind on Syria, as some have reported. Before leaving for the White House, Mattis watched the president's video explaining his decision to pull out of Syria, with Mr. Trump pointing to the sky saying he was doing it for the troops who had died. 50 copies of Mattis's resignation letter had already been printed and in a folder in his office to be distributed upon his return from the White House. Mattis believes pulling out of Syria is a betrayal of the Kurds and the Syrian Democratic Forces, U.S. allies who U.S. military leaders believe will be slaughtered after the U.S. leaves Syria. Here are the highlights from the Mattis resignation letter. Quote, "You have the right to have a Secretary of Defense whose views are better aligned with yours. My views on treating allies with respect and also being clear-eyed about both malign actors and strategic competitors are strongly held and informed by over 4 decades of immersion in these issues." And now the Pentagon is being told to prepare to withdraw about 7,000 or half the troops from Afghanistan against the advice of his senior military leaders. Earlier this month, Mattis was asked whether he was being pressured to pull out of Afghanistan by the president. Mattis warned of the consequences of pulling out.
If we leave 20-odd of the most dangerous terrorist groups in the world centered in that region, and we walk out of there, then we know what will happen. Our intelligence services are very specific that we will be under attack in a number of years.
I'm told to expect more resignations from the Pentagon. A recent poll conducted by the Military Times shows Mattis has an 84% approval rating among the troops. It's not clear who will take the job of Defense Secretary if the president sticks to his plan to pull out of Syria. General Jack Keane has already said on Fox News he won't take the job. Senator Tom Cotton is mentioned as a top choice. Cotton is a former Army first lieutenant who served in Iraq and Afghanistan. Hard to imagine him overseeing a pullout from Syria, given his past experience. Most likely Mattis's deputy, Patrick Shanahan, who gave President Trump cover for his Space Force, which the Pentagon opposed, will be asked to stay on and serve in an acting capacity. Jessica?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Melissa?
And we just want to let people know that we are expecting to also hear from Mitch McConnell soon. And we know that the president did, in fact, address the situation inside the White House, basically saying he was putting all his chips on the Senate. So when we have that sound, we'll bring it to you.
Awesome. All right, back to the Mattis situation. And we have a national security analyst on the couch. So, Morgan, how you feeling?
So I think this whole discussion, there's sort of three different issues going on here. There's the resignation of a Secretary of Defense and what that means for this president. There's an ongoing policy argument that people on the right and the left have as it relates to if we should still be in Afghanistan 17 years later, should we be in Syria? And then there's the communication of that policy to the American people. So not that I have time to go into all three, but I would just point out where I think the biggest error has been for all administrations is that communication piece. I don't think that the average American understands why we're still in Afghanistan. If you look at all the polling, they don't understand why we're in Syria. And that's sort of been...
And you talked to Jack Keane last night, right? General Jack Keane?
So he said on Fox News last night that he was...
All right. Mitch McConnell's addressing the floor. Let's listen.
Investments in disaster relief for hard-hit communities and in our national security, particularly the integrity of our borders. In my view, this legislation that would be quite uncontroversial in a more normal political moment, in a moment when both parties put the obvious national interest ahead of any personal spite for the president. I support the additional border security and disaster aid that the House added to the bill, and I'm proud to vote for it. Now, Mr. President, it's not a radical concept that the American people's government should be able to control the people and the goods that flow into our country. It's not a radical concept that physical barriers play an important role in achieving security, unless there's a caucus of lawmakers who go to bed at night with their front doors wide open that I'm not aware of. What is radical, Mr. President? What is way out of the mainstream? Is this absurd premise of the open borders far left that achieving basic stability and law enforcement on our southern border is somehow in itself without compassion or discriminatory or immoral? Fairness and compassion don't mean only enforcing some of our laws half-heartedly. Fairness and compassion mean that we fulfill our governing duties for the American people. And if we continue to throw up our hands and tolerate a status quo that is allowing too many drugs and dangerous criminals to travel freely into our land, then this federal government is not doing its duty. The facts are clear on this. The need for greater security on our southern border is not some partisan invention. It's an empirical fact, and the need is only growing. Apprehensions along the border have nearly doubled in the past year. The men and women of the Border Patrol are encountering greater numbers of gang members and individuals with criminal histories, more family units, more seizures of cocaine and fentanyl. This is a real crisis, a real crisis. The implications for American communities, for vulnerable children, and for Border Patrol units that are already stretched thin are very real. So, Mr. President, there's no bright line of principle that sets this request for border funding apart from similar requests that many Democrats have supported in the past. A lot of them have supported this in the past. There's no sharp distinction between the proposal my friends across the aisle have decided to oppose today and proposals they've been happy to endorse in the past. The only thing that's really changed are the political winds way over on the far left. That's what's changed. So let's not end this year the way we began it, with another shutdown over the issue of illegal immigration. Remember that?
Yeah, Yeah, well, we spoke this morning, and he actually did, say this, I believe, on Fox News last night, that, that he is not going to take the job. There's still a lot of people, I think, that could be considered for SecDef. Jennifer Griffin mentioned Shanahan, who's the current deputy secretary and who's also been confirmed by the Senate. Another name that I've heard is Dan Coates, who's the director of national intelligence. Again, already confirmed, has a very long history. One name that has been out there that I think we should consider is Dave McCormick. He was a Treasury official in the Bush administration. He was once rumored to be in that deputy secretary position of DOD. He would bring a New York business perspective, which I think the president really likes. And so I think that that's sort of the outsider pick at the moment.
But isn't there an issue here, and this is a thing that has actually unified Democrats and Republicans about the withdrawal from Syria and from Afghanistan, even people who think that we shouldn't be there, that it's just happening too fast, and seemingly only to have consulted Erdogan of Turkey and pleased Vladimir Putin in making this decision and not his own team. So who would want to take this job besides Rand Paul?
The NSC process, the National Security Council process, that is normal, that when you want to make a major decision like withdrawing from Syria, you put it to them, and then you hear what different sides have to say, and then you get in contact with your allies. That's not happening, and that's a major
Our
complaint.
allies, Erdogan.
Yeah, well, exactly. But the problem with Syria is it's basically an undefined mission at this point. We originally had an enemy with a caliphate territory, government, army. All of that is gone. It's scattered. There's still a lot of ISIS fighters, but the mission has changed. We have the Kurds who don't want us to leave them alone. We have Israel who doesn't want us to leave them alone. These are both unending missions.
I don't want to interrupt the conversation, but I want to tell people what they're watching on the screen there, because as we said before, so this is the procedural vote on the House bill, and to even bring it out to the floor and to consider it and work on it and vote, they have to vote on the procedure. This is step one. We don't know if they're going to get the votes to move on this or not, and that's why we're watching it closely. Chris, forgive me. Keep going.
Oh, no worries. Yeah. We have to watch this. This is the government. The business of the people.
They're working.
But, the generals are saying don't pull out because you could create, in this region, because another crisis could be created by ISIS, and the U.S. would have to go back in. And they're essentially saying, you're abandoning the Kurds, our allies, who are about to be slaughtered. Netanyahu is now saying he's ready to ramp up fighting against Iran if that outpost in southern Syria builds out. This comes at a time when the president is saying we've got 10 terrorists a day crossing our borders. He didn't mean this. I don't think he meant the southern border. It's by land, air, and sea. That's a Homeland Security estimate from last year. I'm just wondering why abandon our allies in that region.
Can I take
That's
the other
what the
side
generals are saying. Why do this now when ISIS clearly has still a foothold in that area?
So I was talking to Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis last night, who said that you don't have to be on the ground in Syria in order to defend against ISIS. All they're saying is get the troops that are on the ground and are doing more mundane things at this point. They don't need to be there, and that they can continue to be in the area, making sure that ISIS doesn't move back in. It just means taking the troops off the ground. I don't know if that's true. I'm just putting out there the other side. And this is the argument that was made to me yesterday. In the interest of being fair and balanced, this is what the other side is saying.
And the problem with saying with the Kurds is they want us to be there forever. They need us there forever.
All right, we have some breaking news right now that we have to bring to you. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg has undergone a procedure at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center here in New York City to remove 2 cancerous growths from her left lung. It is Ginsburg's 3rd bout with cancer since she joined the court in 1993. We are monitoring this breaking news. We're going to bring you any developments. But again, she has had surgery. The growths were removed, and she is now resting and recovering. All right, and we are awaiting comments from the president. The press is inside. He talked about the shutdown. We're going to bring you those just as soon as we get them. A lot of breaking news. Everything happening. Don't move. You can't afford it.
All of this turmoil is causing chaos in the markets, chaos abroad, and it's making the United States less prosperous and less secure.
I'm not sure about that. That was Democratic Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer speaking on the Senate floor just moments ago about the looming potential government shutdown and talking about its impact on the markets. The Dow right now is down about 100 points after the markets jumped triple digits this morning. EMAC, I mean, the market is responding to, you had Federal Reserve Bank of New York President John Williams out this morning saying, hey, maybe we're going to listen to the market. We may not raise
Right.
as much as we said. Everybody take a deep breath. That's what the market's moving on.
Well,
or
yeah.
what's your take?
Well, I agree with you on that. I mean, for Chuck Schumer to make that breathtakingly tedious political comment that it's a government shutdown. I mean, government shutdowns are almost as frequent as weather events, and might as well blame it on El Nino. So here's what is really going on. The interest rates going up, right? The Dow lost about 3,800 points since October 3rd when this process first started. So that's nearly about $2.5 trillion out of the S&P 500. That's what's going on. Also, the double whammy in the oil markets. Oil prices are going down. The players that really leveraged up, like we're watching stocks like Chesapeake, Transocean, Weatherford, they're plunging. Some of these players in the oil markets are highly leveraged. So when rates go up and oil prices go down, there's a wipeout. So that's also hitting the markets too. I think it's mostly interest rate related and global slowdown.
Yeah. Anyone else want to venture in on the economy and Chuck Schumer and whether, Chris, give it a whack. Give it a whack.
The stock market plunged every time the government shut down. We see it plunge every weekend, every Christmas, every federal holiday. That's obscene. Of course, it makes no sense. But why not, at this point, make a political point? I mean, that's all we're seeing here right now between Republicans and Democrats. It's just going back and forth. You hate America. No, you hate America. Now, look, the markets are upset. It's just good television,
but you guys
not
hate
good
America
governance.
more. And I would say, though, the president himself has made it a political point, because remember when the stock market was way up before all of his gains got erased, or the gains that came under his presidency, he said it's because of my policies and I take responsibility for it. And then the counterpoint to that is when it's down, is it your responsibility as well? And we
I don't think it's the responsibility. He said it takes the credit for it. And actually Wall Street is saying yes, the market run up is great because of the president's positive policies. Branding himself.
You own it then going forward. And we just saw in the midterm elections that the health care was the #1 issue, followed by immigration and then the economy. So Republicans were not able to pull out a win off of running on the tax cuts and the market doing better and people feeling like they're optimistic about where they can shop.
So they don't vote. They don't vote. Thank you, Morgan. Is basically her point, that they're not voting on thank you. That now the economy is doing better. The concern, though, is that if the market is responding to rising interest rates, it's because players think that as interest rates go up, people spend less, borrow less. The housing market is going to slow down, the number of cars sold, all these kind of things, which is why the president has said again and again and has tweeted violently at the Federal Reserve Chairman to please, stop with the rate hikes. Is it a concern? The market's telling you, we're negative for the year. The market is telling you this is not going to end well. Is that a concern for Republicans?
Well, I think that the good news and part of the reason the market was up is, of course, because of the Chairman Powell, saying that they're going to relook at their rate hikes for 2019.
John Williams.
John Williams, thank you, sorry. But I think we've got a couple things going on from a geopolitical and economic perspective. We do have the slowdown in China. March 1st is the deadline for Trump and Xi to have some sort of, deal potentially on the table, or potentially more tariffs. There's a lot that could happen there. You also see a lot of turmoil in Europe, right? I mean, we've seen what's going on in the past few weeks as it relates to Brexit. And so when you look at the major world economies, none of them are in fantastic shape. But so I think that you will, despite some of the slowdown and potentially in the U.S. as it relates to the market, people will still come back to the U.S. dollar.
So, Chris, that's a great point, because she is talking about the fact that the whole tariff battle has the things that's hurting global growth. What if that gets settled? Because sooner or later it's going to get settled. That would turn the page on a whole lot of things. I mean, it would reaccelerate the market, the economy, and be a huge win for the president. What do you think of the odds that he gets something done in terms of a trade deal with China?
It wouldn't just help things in the short term. It wouldn't just affect the stock prices that day. If you actually got a deal with China to end their unfair trade practices, their state-sponsored cyber espionage, they're stealing our technology, their slave labor policies, if you get anywhere near that, that would help the United States' health long term. The problem is China is an absolute expert at staying one step ahead of where they say they're going to be, because they are in the end in it for themselves. But if President Trump can actually get them to the table and through the suffering that he's been inflicting on them with these tariffs, make fairer trade policies for U.S. manufacturers and companies and protect their IT, which is our intellectual property, which is our greatest asset.
The issue with China, forgive me, the issue with China is nobody really trusts their statistics coming out of that nation at all. And has been suffering from a downturn in the stock markets and a correction over there, I think it behooves China to come to the table and get a deal. I think that Morgan makes an important point about Brexit, because if that crashes out of the EU come March, we could see in the options market right now, traders are assuming the crash position going to safe haven cash plays. Yeah. So I think that it's Brexit overlooming, and the EU slowdown is really an issue too, as Asia, China, and other countries are in slowdown mode.
And keep in mind, Xi stood in the Rose Garden with President Obama in 2015 and promised all of the things that Chris just laid out. And that's because they have a history of lying, stealing, cheating. They don't live by these deals. We have had news in the past 2 weeks about the amount of Navy contractors that they've been hacking and stealing our defense intellectual property, which is an ongoing problem. So my problem with the president coming to a deal in the March, while it would be great for the markets, they'd be quite happy, is, are we actually going to get them to be able to abide by things that they've already promised to previous administrations and did not deliver on?
All right, we will see. In the meantime, so what you are watching there on the screen, the Senate is in the midst of a series of procedural votes. They're trying to advance a bill that would avert a partial shutdown. We are awaiting President Trump and his comments on all of this. We're going to bring you those as soon as we get them, or the results of this vote. Don't go away.